In last week's portion of Mark, it runs right up into this week's. It's a continuous story, but I think it's been chopped up in a strange way. In the Gospel of Mark, we have a lot of what we preachers affectionately call Markan sandwiches. Now, the proper term is intercalation. I don't really know how to pronounce that, but intercalation. I prefer sandwich. Mark will have a story, and then he sticks another one in the middle, and then he kind of goes back to the original story. And that's what we have here. But the first part of the sandwich was read last week, so we kind of have an open-faced Reuben or something. It makes it harder to talk about the story. So I'm going to read to you the ending of last week's story. So Jesus picks up a child, and it says, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. And then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, 'Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me.'" Then John says, "We saw a guy doing an exorcism." He does a little tattletale there. And then Jesus scolds him and brings it back to children and talking about stumbling blocks. So it benefits our interpretation to look at this whole sandwich and keep in mind Mr. Rogers for later. So John jumps in the middle of Jesus' speech and tells Jesus about an exorcist. So we can presume that Jesus is still holding the child, and John, I picture it, John interrupts him and is like, yeah, kids are great. We saw a guy doing something bad, and I have to tell you. But it turns out the man wasn't really doing anything bad. The key word in John's sentence is at the end. He says, "He was not following us." That one word, us. Not Jesus. John doesn't say he was not following you. Us, meaning the disciples. Now, last week, the disciples argued over who among them was the greatest, right? Remember? But this week, now they're saying that they as a group are the greatest and everyone else is wrong. They're the best because they were disciples first. And of course, this isn't true, so Jesus corrects John. The other man is doing good things. Maybe he saw Jesus preach but just couldn't drop his whole life and hit the road. So he does what he can with what he has available. And he's doing good. He's just doing it differently than the disciples. And so they determine that he isn't doing religion right, in air quotes. So interdenominational conflict existed even back then. Jesus tells them, don't worry about him. He's doing good things. But the disciples didn't like how he was doing it, so they tried to put a stumbling block in front of him. We do that too. I do that at home a lot. You're not doing that right, I'll just do it. Usually involving washing dishes or something. Somebody wants to help, but maybe does it differently than we do. And that's okay, because it still ends up getting done, right? So what's the big deal? So Jesus squashes that argument and then goes back to his original point before he was so rudely interrupted. But, as with every Markan sandwich, the three sections are related. Children, back in the ancient times, and I guess you could argue today, didn't have any social value. They had no cachet in society. In the ancient world, it was honor and shame based. That's how society worked. You wanted to succeed in life, you had to do whatever you could to get honor and not be shamed. So the way to gain honor was to associate with people who had more honor than you. Usually that was somebody richer than yourself, but never was a child. So people love their children, of course. I'm not saying that. But it didn't offer any social or monetary benefit to hang out with them. However, Jesus always associated with people who could not give him more honor or social status. And that's why he's different. He says that's how you get true honor. He says to welcome the children who are the lower class of society, and in turn all the other outcasts of society, and to serve all people. That's where the real honor comes from. And don't put a stumbling block in front of these children, or anyone really, as we are all children of God. If someone has good in their heart, who are we to stop them? Then Jesus gets pretty harsh with his language, right? If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off, etc. If something isn't serving the good works you're called to do, sometimes it's better to rid yourself of that thing. Jesus uses hyperbole to make a point, and sometimes we brush it off as just exaggeration. You're like, oh, he's just exaggerating. He didn't really mean that. When it's actually the opposite. That's our peril here. When Jesus uses such large exaggerations, it means that we should be paying more attention to the point of this part. That this part of the story is very, very important. Excuse me. Caroline Lewis explains about stumbling blocks. She writes, quote, "We could be the cause of someone tripping up in their discipleship. We could be the cause of someone stumbling in their faith. That we could be the cause of someone questioning whether or not they are truly a viable member of God's kingdom. And we would rather blame another or bend to shame to safe and secure demonstrations of faith than take accountability for the ways in which we have prevented others from living into their fullness as a child of God." End quote. So Jesus uses children as an example because it's easier to understand here. I mean, we've all seen the hurt in a child's eyes when they've been discouraged from something, right? We've all experienced that in our lives, and what's the lasting effect of that feeling? What happened to the man that the disciples tried to stop from exorcising demons? I always ask myself that. What happened to that, demoniac whose demons went into the pigs, or the woman at the well? Did this man stop healing people because he felt shame? If so, what good could he have done if he had kept healing people? We never will know. Or did he ignore the disciples and keep doing his own thing? I hope he did. But it's really hard to ignore the haters. Sometimes you have to continue your mission. Now, I mentioned Mr. Rogers before. I watched Mr. Rogers a lot as a kid. I haven't watched Mr. Rogers in like 25 years. But I still remember a lot about the show. And we watched a documentary about him called "Won't You Be My Neighbor?" It was really great. So I suggest you watch it. It's on DVD. Now, I didn't know that Mr. Rogers was an ordained Presbyterian minister. Did any of you guys know that? See? I'm the only one who didn't know that. Oh, well. I was like 8, so I guess you can forgive me. But in the documentary, it talks about how he saw his show and the education of children as his ministry. That was his mission in life. Without ever mentioning God specifically, he taught generations of people good Christian values. He taught people that children matter, that they are to be listened to, and talked to honestly. It's amazing the kinds of hard topics he covered over the years. It's astounding, actually. And he did it without condescending to children. Rather, he treated them as individuals, as special, and as loved. And in his later years, he caught a little heat for that, I think, unjustly. Because just like Jesus told us that we are loved, that's what he was doing. Jesus came to earth not to make God love us, but to show us that God already loves us. And we are all God's children, so we deserve honor and respect and not have stumbling blocks put in our way. So I am looking forward to watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood with Frankie someday, and I think I'm going to see it in a whole different way now as an adult and as an informed documentary watcher. And the message of the gospel, of Mr. Rogers, of us today, is clear now as it was then, and we tend to muddy it up, but this is the message. Love God. Love your neighbor. And for goodness sakes, be kind. I added that part. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.